Hi, Michael. Thanks for talking with me today. I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about the process that you went through in order to build this project with Voices 21C.
Of course, yes. And oh my gosh, like Emily, thank you for talking to me and for talking to Voices 21C and setting up this creative partnership where we are responding to you guys, the conversations that you and Andre are having about choral music. Like, it's so cool as a composer seeing this project. You know, it's like such a blank canvas. We could literally do anything, and it's just going to be so awesome to see what we come up with. So, knowing that I was leading the first project for the first episode, I listened to the podcast beginning to end. I wrote down any quotes that stuck out to me that were just point blank moving from the podcast, from you, from Andre, from Jeremy. And I think about 15 minutes in, I had a good idea about like which groups of people you were talking about. You know, you were talking about the choir and how the conductor views the choir. You were talking about the audience, the role of an audience, and how musicians and performing arts organizations view their audiences. And you were also talking about the refugee crisis, about displaced people, and how people who don't face housing insecurity, people are privileged to not live in violent areas, you know, like who don't have to flee violence, how those people view people who have had to deal with those things, you know, who do not have homes. So it was this, there were so many conversations, but they all concerned the viewing of others, you know, and in every single one, it's like, you know, there's a school of thought where the choir is just there to respond to what the conductor says. There's also a school of thought that honors the choir's critical thinking skills, you know, and allows them to ask questions where sometimes that's even not allowed, to respond to what's going on, to maybe even suggest an idea. You know, because like you said, it's like the choir is so much more mindful and has such a stake in it if they're allowed to make those kinds of calls, if even just suggest them, not, you know, whatever, you already said it. And, you know, the audience, and Andre said, you know, they're not just there to need you, they're there to engage. You know, they can think critically too. And if we make this space where they kind of don't feel like they should think about it critically, or it wouldn't really matter, maybe they won't show up. You know, it's the same idea. You know, are we boiling down this group of people to one topic or like one action that they are allowed to do, and that's it? Especially with the refugee crisis, it's like, you know, are we boiling that entire body of millions and millions of people down to, you know, just needing something, you know, like as if they haven't lived an extraordinary life, like Jeremy said. And I almost included in this project, I was writing down these quotes from you guys that voices could sing and improvise with, but I also wanted to include Home, a poem by Warsan Shire. It was circulating a lot when the camps at the border started becoming a media topic. And the first two lines are, "You only flee home when home is the mouth of a shark." It's an incredibly moving poem. You probably, I mean, a lot of us circulated it when it really got some attention. But I wasn't sure of the copyright laws around it. I didn't include it, but I did include Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, because that's where most of us hear the term multitudes for the first time. I am large, I contain multitudes, you know, and these groups of people, you know, choirs, they're not just there to respond to you. The audiences are not just there to need you. The refugee crisis, the displaced people are not just there to need something, you know, they're there to make a life and engage in a community. So the idea of having multiplicity, being more than one thing, I saw to be very relevant. So I took these quotes, you know, from all of these situations, and I shuffled them up in a way that you kind of didn't know which conversation they were from. You know, they made sense in every group of people. You know, you could have applied it to any of the conversations you had, and it would have made a lot of sense. So I shuffled up all the quotes, I handed them to voices, and I said, just improvise over these, you know, choose any up to 3, sing whatever you do at least 3 times, change the phrasing, change the dynamics. You can fragment it, sing a few words, and, you know, improvise like that. I also gave them 2 other options though for things they could do. They could also drone, you know, an E flat or a B flat, because we were in E flat major. That way the improvisations would have this nice foundation underneath them. And lastly, I said, write a 4-chord chorale soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and record every part. And don't end on an E flat chord, don't end on a tonic chord, and do one thing that would make a tenured professor sigh. I wanted to see what we would do, and I gave them that prompt, and they did not disappoint. So we had these 3 activities. I did all 3, and I put them into Soundtrap, which was the editing software we used. It's cloud-based, so we could all log on to the website and contribute our tracks, and everyone could see them. It was not like we had to pass the files back and forth really messily. So I did all 3 just so they could kind of orally understand what all 3 ideas might be. And I just said, respond to what's there, So the first person went in, they responded to what I did. Then the next person went in and responded to what was there. And 3 days later, Emily, we had like 36 tracks of amazing material. We had 6 people do chorales, we had a bunch of drones, we had this wonderful call and response where like I left spaces in between my improvisations, and Elise, for example, like she sang in the spaces and she had like a conversation with me, and the text she chose was like a perfect pairing for mine. And it's just the amazing creative stuff that can happen when we do this kind of project. So the last that 3rd day, we went onto Zoom at like 7 o'clock, all of us, at least the ones who could make it, and we had Soundtrap open and we discussed what was there. Like I didn't just want to be the one person making the choices, because that's not how we work, So I said, where some things are kind of muddy, some places, we want to make sure that everyone's text can be heard at least one time. I was personally going in and EQing all the tracks. I was cutting out the frequencies underneath their lowest note, because in alto, like if their lowest note is like a G, for example, everything below that, if there's like a rumble or something that's in that frequency spectrum, like the basses are therefore competing with that rumble. So like if you're editing choral projects, EQing is something you should definitely learn about. It's like the technique on an instrument. We practice techniques so that what we want to do in our minds is best done through our hands. So just like that, brush up on your editing technique. So I EQ'd, I reverbed a little bit. When you run everyone through the same reverb, it gives a better illusion that we're all in the same room, rather than 16 different spaces. And I also panned out the voices, if you're wearing earbuds. I panned a few improvisations to the left and a few to the right, nothing too far, but I kept the drones in the center and the chorale in the center because those were foundational. But like when you do that, you can hear 2 people singing at the same time and really actually understand both of them, but if they're in the center, if you haven't panned anything out, it's a ball of mush. So we discussed, where things were mushy. We moved some things around so you could hear everyone's text. We made a lot of good creative decisions together. We signed off. I did some final editing and audio balance, and sent it to you. So it's become this amazing thing, and it happened in like 4 days. But it's just so wonderful, and like these melodies that are in it get stuck in my head all the time, especially since I've just been living in that file for like 4 days. But I've truly forgotten which conversations they came from, because they apply to the broad message from that podcast. So this is going to be such a cool collaboration. It's going to be great. I hope people find some good use in these responses we're giving. Hope they flesh out the understanding and the messages that you guys are presenting in these conversations. This is just going to be such a cool project. I'm so glad we're involved.